English Literature Studies.
Hey there, you are watching English Literature Studies. Since we are discussing different forms of poetry, and so far we have discussed lyric, elegy, and in this video we will look at what is ode. Ode is the subcategory of lyric. As lyric is subjective in nature, ode is also subjective in nature. So let's look at what is the meaning of ode. Ode is an elaborate lyric verse that deals seriously with a dignified, lofty theme. In simple words, in ode, poet glorifies, he praises an event, place, individual, and idea. When he admires an event, place, individual, and idea is called ode. To better understand what ode is, let's look at some characteristics of ode. Ode is derived from the Greek word eden, which means to sing or chant. It is derived from a Greek word eden, and it means to sing or chant. It is a type of lyrical stanza. Ode is the subcategory of lyric, and lyric is subjective in nature. So ode is also subjective in nature. Ode is structured to glorify something ordinary. When the poet describes an ordinary event, individual, place, in a glorified manner, that is called ode. Odes are often ceremonial and formal in tone. They are formal and serious in tone. Ode poems were performed publicly to celebrate victories. The ordinary object is glorified using different adjectives and personification. When the poet glorifies an ordinary object, he uses different adjectives and personification to describe that event, any object, in an exalted manner. It is accompanied by music and dance. If we look at the history of ode, then it was accompanied by music and dance. Since it is the subcategory of lyric, lyric was meant to be played on a musical instrument, so ode is also a musical poem. It is accompanied by music and dance. In ancient times, ode used to be sung in chorus. It expresses high emotions in a grand style. When a poet wants to describe his exalted emotions, the exaltation in his emotions, then he uses ode. So, when a poet wants to describe his high emotions prestigiously, in a dignified manner, then he chooses to write an ode. Let's look at some features of ode. Ode is directly addressed to the person or object. When a poet describes a person or object in a prestigious manner, then he addresses that person or an object directly. For example, in Ode to Nightingale, Ode to Autumn, and Ode to West Wind, poet addresses Nightingale, Autumn, and West Wind respectively. In Ode to Nightingale, poet addresses Nightingale directly. In Ode to Autumn, poet addresses Autumn. In Ode to West Wind, poet addresses West Wind. So, it is very important to understand that in ode, poet addresses the object or the person directly. It is subjective and musical. As we discussed earlier, that it is subjective because it is the subcategory of lyric and it is musical. One of the very important features of ode that it deals with serious subject matter. Sometimes it is a lyrical meditation on a solemn subject. Ode can be public or private. It is usually longer than a song, but not as long as epic. It is exalted in subject matter, means it reflects high emotions, elevated in style and tone. Here are some examples of ode. Ode to Autumn by John Keats. The Progress of Poesy by Thomas Gray. Intimation of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood by William Wordsworth. There are three types of ode: Pindaric Ode, Horacian Ode, and Irregular Ode. Let's look at Pindaric Ode first. The Pindaric Ode is named after a Greek poet, Pindar. In ancient times, Pindaric odes were written to celebrate victories, originally sung to the movement of dance. It has three stanzas named as strophe, antistrophe, and epode. Strophe was sung for the dancers during the movement from right to left. It consists of two lines repeated as unit. The strophe part consists of two lines, and it is repeated as a unit in the poetry. On the other hand, antistrophe was sung for the dancers during the movement from left to right. When the dancers used to move from the left to right, the poet used to sing antistrophe section of the Pindaric Ode. The antistrophe part offers a thematic development, however, structure is the same as strophe. It introduces a thematic development in the poetry, ode. This is a second section of the poetry. The last section is epode. Epode was sung when the dancers stood still. When the dancers stopped dancing, the poet used to sing epode part of the Pindaric Ode. The strophe and antistrophe corresponded in meter, but differed in structure and length. So these both strophe and antistrophe used to have corresponding meter sometimes, but it always differed in structure and length. Epode concludes the idea of ode. So each pair of strophe and antistrophe might be different in meters from other pairs, but the epode remained the same throughout the context. So in each pair of strophe and antistrophe, meters may be same sometimes and it may differ sometime, but epode remained the same throughout the context of the poetry. Among English poets, Thomas Gray followed Pindaric Ode structure. The Progress of Poesy and the Bard are very fine examples of Thomas Gray written in Pindaric Ode structure. However, Congreve and Ben Jonson also followed this structure, but Thomas Gray's works showed more perfection. So, Thomas Gray is well known among English poets for writing Pindaric Ode. So, this is all about Pindaric Ode. So, let's move on to the other type of ode, which is Horacian. Horacian odes are written in quatrains, means 4 lines. It was named after a Roman poet, Horace. It is less complex in meter. As compared to Pindaric Ode, Horacian Ode is less complex, simple, easy to understand. So, Horacian odes are more simple in meter as compared to Pindaric Ode. It is written in a conversational form. The subjects are meditative and calm of Horacian odes. Horacian odes contain short stanzas of similar length, meter, and rhyming schemes. Pindaric Ode. English odes are based on the style of Horacian odes for its clarity, dignity, and directness. So, English odes are also based on Horacian odes because they are more clear, dignified, and direct. Let's move on to the last type of ode, irregular ode. Romantics were not familiar with Pindaric odes. Romantics gave a new look to the ode. The ode that existed in ancient times, Romantics were not familiar with that type of ode. Pindaric odes were not so popular. They only existed in translations and some other contexts. So they transformed the Pindaric ode and the new ode called Irregular Ode in English language. Irregular ode does not follow any structure, but it rhymes. It has no fixed lines. It has irregular verse structure and stanza patterns. That is why it is called Irregular Ode. Here are some examples of Irregular Ode. Ode on the Intimation of Immortality by William Wordsworth. Ode to the Melancholy on Indolence by John Keats. Dejection and Ode by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Odes to the West Wind written by P.B. Shelley is also an example of irregular ode. Ode to the Confederate Dead is written by American critic Alan Tetz. Basically, ode was started in ancient times and it is taken from a Greek word Eden. It used to be written to celebrate victories, and the Pindaric odes are named after Pindar, and Horacian odes are named after Roman poet Horace. So this is all about Pindaric, Horacian, and irregular ode. So at last, I would like to mention that learning is a never-ending process. So if you have anything to share about ode, do share your part of knowledge in the comment section about ode. Thank you for watching English Literature Studies.